security. Remove her. She doesn't belong here. The words cut through the orchestra like a blade through silk. Every head in the Grand Hyatt ballroom turned. Crystal chandeliers threw cold light across about 200 faces. Politicians, heirs, corporate kings, all of them watching the same thing. A black woman standing in the center of the room. Alone. Composed. Outnumbered. And a hand closing around her arm. Another pressing firm at her waist. Security had already moved in. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She looked at the woman who had given the order. Red gown, cold smile. The particular expression of someone who had never once been told no by a room. And said, very quietly, "You really don't want to do this." Shinyuri's smile widened. "Oh, you think," she said. "I absolutely do." And then, from the entrance, cutting through every sound in the room with the precision of someone who had never needed volume to make a point, a voice. "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" The orchestra stopped. The room stopped. Lee Jae-won stood magnificently at the ballroom doors. The whole room had a quiet silence as he walked in. If that entrance just gave you chills, hit the like button right now, because trust me, you have absolutely no idea what that man is capable of. And this story is only just beginning. Earlier that day, in the cramped and beloved office of the Bridges Cultural Foundation on the third floor of a building in Mapogu, a girl named Jisoo had pressed a crayon flat against her drawing, and asked the kind of question only children dared to ask out loud. "Uni, do you think someone powerful could ever love someone like us?" Nadira Adeyemi had gone very still. She looked at this child, biracial, 12 years old, carrying her complicated identity like a backpack that never fit right, and felt the question land somewhere tender inside her own chest. Because it was not only Jisoo's question. It had been hers too for months, sitting in her chest unanswered. Especially on the nights she looked at her own reflection, and then at the world she had agreed, against every instinct, to step into. Though shocked at the little girl thinking to ask her such a question, Nadira responded softly, "Why do you ask that?" "Because the kids at school say powerful people only love people like themselves," Jisoo said. "Rich people. Famous people. Korean people. Not people like me. Not people like you." Nadira had set down her pen. She had looked out the window where Seoul stretched gray and silver and impossible in the early afternoon light, and thought about a man with cold eyes that turned warm only in private. She had thought about the weight of a jade pendant against her collarbone. She had thought about the question she had been living inside ever since a rainy Tuesday changed the shape of everything. She hadn't answered Jisoo. She had only smiled, squeezed the girl's shoulder, and gone back to work. But the question followed her into the car that evening, into the elevator, through the doors of a ballroom that had never seen anything like her. What no one at the gala knew was that Nadira had refused Lee Jae-won twice before she said yes. The first time was the night she found out who he really was. She had been 3 months into a quiet, careful, astonishing courtship she had never expected. Introduced to him through a mutual contact as a private investor with a social conscience, which she later understood was the most elegantly packaged understatement of her adult life. When she learned that the name Han Jae-won was spoken in certain Seoul circles the way weather was spoken of, something you prepared for, not something you controlled. She had driven to his apartment, handed him back the bracelet he'd given her the week before, and told him plainly that she didn't have the capacity to love someone whose world could swallow her foundation whole. He had taken the bracelet. He had not argued. He had only looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and said quietly, "I understand." She had cried the entire drive home and despised herself for it. The second time was 4 months later, when he appeared at one of her fundraising events. Not as a donor, not announced, simply standing at the back of the room in a dark coat, watching her give a speech about belonging. She had found him afterward, and felt every rehearsed argument she'd prepared evaporate on contact. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because I've been waiting," he said. "For you to be ready." "What if I'm never ready? Then I'll still be here." "You must have all the time in this world to be doing nothing but that," she said. "For you, yes." She told him to leave. She watched him leave. She spent the following week furious at herself for reasons she couldn't properly name. It was the third meeting that broke her open. A rainy Tuesday. Her car had a flat tire outside the foundation. Him pulling up because one of her staff had panicked and called the one emergency number they had. She came downstairs to find Lee Jae-won, one of the most feared men in South Korea, crouching in the rain beside her blown tire, his expensive coat getting soaked, entirely unbothered. "You're going to ruin your coat," she said. "I've ruined worse things," he said without looking up. "I don't want your world," she said. "I want to be very clear. I don't want the empire or the fear or the—" "I know," he said. "I'm not offering you my empire. I'm asking if you want me. You don't quit, do you?" "I never stop chasing what I want." She stood in the rain and thought about Jisu's question. About what it would cost to love someone like this. About what it would cost her not to. "Yes," she said. "God help me. Yes." 6 weeks later, he placed the Leaf family necklace around her neck in a room with no audience. It was 300 years old, passed through generations, never given outside the bloodline. He held it for a moment before putting it on her, turning it over in his hands the way a man turns over a decision he's already made. "When you wear this," he said, "you stand beside me. Publicly. Permanently. Not as a secret. Not as something I'm ashamed of. As my equal." She touched the carved jade pendant. "I'm not worthy of this." "You're more than worthy," Han said, looking at her. "I'm not even from a recognized family. The people in your world are going to have opinions. Let them have it. My world adjusts to me," he said simply. "Not the other way." She had believed him. Standing in the Grand Hyatt ballroom with her chin level and security's hands on her body, she was about to find out what that belief cost. Shin Yuri had spotted the necklace from across the room at 9:47. She froze mid-laugh, champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips. A woman she did not recognize. A woman who was black and breathtaking, and standing alone with the composure of someone who did not require the room's approval. The jade pendant caught the chandelier light against a dark collarbone. Yuri set down her glass. Yuri had been engaged to Lee Jae-won for 14 months before he ended it. She had known, going in, that the arrangement was built on aligned interests, her family's shipping empire, his network, a future that looked good from certain angles. She had known this and had allowed herself, somewhere in the architecture of it, to believe it was love. Jae-won had been honest with her when he ended things, which was the part she had found most unforgivable. "Respect isn't a reason to make either of us miserable for the rest of our lives," was not the kind of sentence a person moved past easily. She had been carrying it, and everything around it, into every room she entered since. She crossed the ballroom toward Nadira slowly. "Where did you get that necklace?" Her Korean was perfectly enunciated. Her tone was almost pleasant. "It was given to me," Nadira said. Yuri's smile flickered. "Given? By who?" Nadira held her gaze and said nothing. She understood, with the clarity that came from years of navigating rooms that hadn't expected her, that this was not a question. It was an opening move. Yuri switched to English. Deliberate. Louder. "Do you even understand what you're wearing? That piece is a Leaf family heirloom. It is not decorative. It is not transferable. It is certainly not meant for." She paused, and the pause was surgical, looking her from head to toe in a disgusting manner. "Girls who wander in off the street." Nadira feigned a little smile. The nearest conversations went quiet. In the particular acoustics of cruelty, silence spread fast. "She's not on the registry." "Who invited her?" Nadira looked at Yuri and said, with the evenness of someone who had already decided not to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, "I know exactly what I'm wearing." The confidence seemed to physically irritate Yuri. Something in her jaw tightened. "What? Did I just hear you talk? You are not from any recognized family," she said, louder now, her composure beginning to show it seems. "You are not on the guest list. You have no place in this room because it's definitely not for lowlifes like you. So I will ask you one more time. What are you doing here, and who gave you that necklace?" Nadira took a breath. She thought of Jisoo asking whether powerful people could love someone like them. She thought of a man in the rain beside a ruined tire. She thought of jade settling warm against her skin, and the words that had come with it. Then smiled. She opened her mouth. Yuri turned away from her. Security. They came quickly, because that was the nature of these rooms. One hand on her arm, another firm at her waist. You're making a mistake, Nadira said quietly, smiling, the kind of smile that beamed confidence. Yuri smiled, properly this time, with the full architecture of someone who believed they had already won. No, she said, leaning closer. You are. And what exactly do you think you're doing? Not loud. It didn't need to be. The voice carried the particular register of a man who had never needed volume to command a room. And the room recognized it the way animals recognize weather. Every head turned. The orchestra stopped. Lee Jae-won stood at the entrance in a dark suit, one hand in his jacket pocket, looking at the tableau before him with an expression that was perfectly, lethally calm. He walked forward. The guests parted. He crossed the room in 12 steps. Security released Nadira before he reached them. They knew better than to wait for a direct instruction. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her first. Only at her. Touched her face. Are you hurt? He said. No, she said. He held her eyes for 2 seconds. Long enough to confirm, long enough to commit to what came next. And then he turned to face Shin Yuri with the full weight of his attention. Explain, he said. Yuri lifted her chin. I was protecting your family's reputation. She is wearing the Lee necklace without any. You were promised an alliance, he said. Not my heart. Not my decisions. Not the right to lay a hand on someone who belongs to me. Jay, she said, that's what she called him, though he never liked it. I am trying to, he raised a hand. No words, and don't you call me that. The ballroom was so quiet Nadira could hear the ice shifting in someone's glass. He turned to the room. Not theatrically, there was nothing theatrical about Lee Jae-won, but with the deliberateness of someone who understood that some things needed to be said in front of witnesses. Allow me to introduce my fiancé. The collective intake of breath was quiet and unmistakable. Nadira felt his hand find hers. She felt the warmth of it, something she had only ever known in private, now extended into the world. She held it. Yuri's composure cracked. Nadira watched it happen. The flicker, the realization, the reconstruction that came almost immediately but not quite fast enough. What? You ended our engagement, Yuri said, her voice lower now, more dangerous. For her. I ended our engagement, Jae-won said, because it was the honest thing to do. She doesn't understand you or your world. She doesn't know what you are. She knows exactly who I am, he said. And she chose me anyway. That is more than you were ever willing to do. Something moved behind Yuri's eyes. Past humiliation, past anger, into something rawer and less controlled. If I can't have you, she said very quietly, no one will. Jae-won smirked. The threat sat in the air like smoke. Security moved, his security, not the venues, materializing from positions around the room that most guests hadn't even registered. Yuri was escorted out with the minimum necessary force and the maximum possible efficiency. The cameras in handbags and the whispers exchanged behind programs began immediately, because that too was the nature of these rooms. Outside, Yuri stood on wet pavement and felt her world close in. Her driver was already pulling around. Her phone was already buzzing with people who had already heard. She answered none of it. She looked up at the lit windows of the ballroom and felt the heat of humiliation, and the cold of the rain and something else. Something that had no clean name but lived in the neighborhood of obsession. She thinks she won, Yuri said to no one with a crying voice. Inside, the ballroom recovered the way these rooms always did. Quickly, with the practiced amnesia of the elite. The orchestra resumed. The whispers continued, but they were different now, carrying not scandal but significance. And significance in this world was a form of power. He found Nadira a private alcove off the main room. He sat beside her and was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. I should have been here when you arrived. You came when it mattered, she said. That's a low bar. I'm not measuring you against a low bar. She paused. I don't need protection from love, Jae-won. I knew walking in here would be difficult. I chose to walk in anyway. He reached over and straightened the necklace where it had shifted. His fingers were careful against her skin. She said, you don't understand my world, he said. She's wrong, Nadira said. I understand your world perfectly. I simply refuse to be afraid of it. It was 4 days later, nearly midnight, when Yuri made her mistake. Nadira had stayed late at the foundation reviewing grant applications. Her staff left at 10. She locked up alone and descended the stairs into the quiet of the street. A car sat across the road with its lights off. She noticed it the way she'd learned to notice wrong things, calmly, without breaking stride, her hand finding her phone. The door opened. Shin Yuri stepped out. She looked nothing like she had at the gala. No performance, no engineering. Hair loose. Coat slightly askew. Eyes carrying the particular brightness of someone who had not been sleeping and had been living too close to a feeling they couldn't metabolize. You ruined my life, you oaf, she said. Her voice was even. That was the frightening part. Nadira stopped walking. She did not back up. Please don't. I didn't ruin your life. You never had his heart to lose. How dare you? You don't know what we had. I know what you're doing right now, Nadira said. And I'm asking you for your own sake, to get back in that car and go home. Yuri laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You think you're untouchable. You think because he said fiancé in front of all those people, because you're wearing his grandmother's necklace, you think that protects you. I think, Nadira said carefully, that you're in a lot of pain and you're about to make it worse. Yuri got more angry at this point. She moved fast. The slap was hard. Open palm, full force, the kind of blow that came from the shoulder. Nadira stumbled sideways, her ear ringing, vision flashing white at the edges. She caught herself against the building wall. Yuri's hand closed around her coat and hair, pulling, shoving. You think this is over? Yuri hissed, her voice breaking now. You think you won? Headlights. Not one set. 4. 5. The street flooded with white so sudden and total that Yuri released her and stumbled back. Black SUVs filled the narrow road from both ends. Too fast, too quiet, too purposeful to be the police. Doors opened. Lee Jae-won stepped out last. He crossed the distance between them in seconds. He stopped in front of Nadira and looked at her the way she'd seen him do once before, taking inventory, confirming that the things he cared about were still intact. Then his hand raised slowly and touched her cheek, where the redness had already begun to bloom. Did she touch you? It was not precisely a question. Yes, Nadira said. He lowered his hand. He turned. Yuri had not run. Whatever else she was not a coward. She stood in the flood of headlights with her chin lifted and her hands shaking. You mistook obsession for love, Jae-won said. His voice was very quiet, the way it always was when it was most serious. I understand that it felt real. I understand that losing the engagement hurts you. But what you did tonight is something else entirely. I loved you, Yuri said. Her voice cracked. I loved you and you threw it away for. No, he said. You wanted to own me. There's a difference. And I think some part of you has always known that. She flinched. Your family's business relationships with Han Holdings will be dissolved by the end of the week, he said. I warned you and now you've let it come to this. Your access to the social networks we share, the boards, the foundations, the private events is revoked effective immediately. The political contacts you've cultivated through my name will be informed that that connection no longer stands. Nobody messes with what belongs to me. That's everything, she said softly. Yes, he said. And if you come near her again, if you come near anything she has built or anyone she loves, there will be nothing left that I haven't already taken. Do you understand me? A long silence. My father will hear of this, Yuri said. Her voice had gone somewhere very small. Good, he should. He needs to know what kind of daughter he gave birth to. And make sure you tell him everything. His team moved in. Not roughly. The point had already been made, but with the finality of a door closing. This is not over, Yuri said. She was guided to a separate car, which took her home. And that was the last time she appeared in any story involving either of them. He came back to Nadira. She was leaning against the building wall, not because she needed to, but because it helped to have something solid behind her. He stood in front of her and the headlights and the night settled around them. I'm sorry, he said. Stop apologizing for the things she did. Nadira said. I'm apologizing for the world I brought you into. You didn't bring me into it. I walked in. She paused. I keep walking in. That's what choosing means. He looked at her. You could choose differently. I know, she said. And then, because honesty had always been the only currency that worked between them. Your world doesn't scare me, J1. Losing you would. Something shifted in his face. The particular softening around the eyes. She had learned to read like a language. Are you certain? She reached up and laid her palm against his jaw. I choose you. Not your empire. Not your name or your history or whatever fear you carry about what you are. You. The man who crouched in the rain fixing my tire. The man who waited. Are we clear? He turned his head and pressed his lips against her palm. Yes, he said. We're clear. The wedding was small. Not intimate in the false way powerful people sometimes described elaborate ceremonies. Actually small. 30 guests. A room in a traditional hanok that his grandmother's family had owned for 4 generations. No press. No statements. No announcements. She wore white with gold at the edges and the Han family necklace and nothing else from his world, which was entirely by design. He wore dark, and looked at her the entire time, and said his vows quietly and directly in the way he did everything, without flourish, without excess, with the kind of commitment that filled a room regardless. A month later, she visited the foundation on a Tuesday afternoon wearing her wedding ring. She hadn't announced it. She hadn't changed the signage. She had simply continued, which was what she had always done. Jisoo was in the craft room, working on a collage with the single-minded intensity that 12-year-olds brought to creative projects. She looked up when Nadira came in. Her eyes went immediately to the ring. Yuni, she said slowly. Yes, Nadira said. Jisoo looked at her for a long moment with the unfiltered solemnity of a child deciding whether what she's seeing is real. Then a smile broke across her face, the kind that changed the whole shape of it. So, she said, someone powerful can love someone like us? Nadira set down her bag. She crossed the room and crouched in front of this girl. This biracial 12-year-old who had been carrying her complexity like a backpack that never fit right, and looked at her very carefully. Yes, she said. The right one can. Jisoo nodded, as if this confirmed something she had been working out for a while. Then she went back to her collage. News of the marriage moved through elite circles the way all significant things moved in that world. Quietly between the right people, reshaping the landscape without announcing itself. Yuri almost lost herself, but ended up making peace with it. Nadira was not introduced to J1's world gradually or conditionally. She was simply present in it, at the functions that mattered, at the tables where decisions were made, wearing the necklace that 300 years of one family's history had passed down to her. Not hidden, not a secret, respected. And for the first time, the most feared man in Korea stood not as a ruler above his domain, but as something smaller and rarer and far more difficult to build. A husband standing beside the woman he had waited for. If this story kept you here till the end, please subscribe so you never miss another one. Hit like, drop a comment below telling me, would you have walked back into that ballroom? And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the right love never asks you to disappear. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.